I ett program från engelska BBC ska vi få möta Christopher som föddes med en allvarlig hjärnskada. Han kan varken gå eller tala och inte förrän vid 12 års ålder lärde han sig skriva på sitt alldeles speciella sätt. Men sen gick det fort, för 3 år senare när han var 15 så publicerade han sin första bok.
De andra kunde välja att dölja sina hemliga världar. Hans värld var så hemlig att förtvivlans demon alltid strök kring hans dörr. Men nu skrockade han förnöjt, för nu trädde han in i samma värld som de andra. Nu kunde han välja hur mycket han skulle yppa och hur mycket han skulle förtiga. Hans röst skulle bli det skrivna ordet.
I think there's no doubt that Christopher Nolan is an amazingly gifted young writer. And it might seem best just to treat him as a gifted young writer and ignore the fact that he's disabled. That might seem the seemly thing to do. I think it would be wrong because the fact that he's disabled, it's not that you have to make allowances for his disability, but the fact that he's disabled allows him to speak for people who have been silent for centuries. He keeps saying this. He's very aware of what he calls the human dross, how we've written it off, how we've treated it as worthless. So here you hear not just Christie's voice, he feels, but the voice of generations of people who have been like him.
Christopher Nolan's brain was damaged at birth. Lack of oxygen during delivery affected the motor cortex, which means that he can't control the involuntary spasms of his muscles or make them do what he wants. So he can't walk, he can't swallow or feed himself, and although he has a voice, he can't speak.
He had to be delivered by emergency cesarean section, and when he was delivered, he was totally asphyxiated. And when the nurse woke me up out of my sleep that evening, the first thing she said to me was, "Wake up, Mrs. Nolan. You have a baby boy. He's critically ill, though. It took 2 hours to revive him."
I was naturally disappointed, because I played games myself and I had some aspirations towards athletics. And I thought that I would have a son who'd be at least a 4-minute miler or a good Gaelic footballer or hurler. I had fears that he would be mentally retarded. As you see yourself, Christy has to have everything done for him. Absolutely everything.
All set for school, Christy?
He sometimes likes to do things that he isn't capable of, such as doing something with electricity or opening a plug or socket. He used to at one time get me to put out a saw on a plane or anything that would be used by a carpenter in front of him, and he'd spend maybe half an hour looking at those things.
And when he wrote his first poem, that was the most wonderful moment of my life. It was worth going through all the years of looking after him, and it was worth all the disappointments and frustrations and all the times that you had to imagine a way out of a difficulty with somebody as disabled as Christy.
Hon stödde hans sorgsna haka i sina varma, kupade händer. Han tyglade sin fruktan och måttade allvarligt med pekstickan mot de bokstäver som flödade ur honom. Nora vred fram pappret och såg i smyg hur Joseph skrev. Jag lärde mig buga. Förlamningen hävdes, tilltron växte. Jag öppnade människornas ögon för en smärtsam insikt.
In 1981, the year of the disabled, Christopher Nolan's first book was published. Downburst of Dreams was a collection of poetry and prose he had written between the ages of 11 and 14. It also included a short autobiography. His new book, Under the Eye of the Clock, is pure autobiography. Now 21, he takes a more mature look at the experiences which formed him.
What makes Downburst of Dreams special is that it's written by someone who has been locked into his body for so long. And when it comes out, the language is like an avalanche. It's immensely exuberant and dynamic. It's also very difficult. He has a huge vocabulary. It's mysterious where he gets it from. He uses words in very difficult senses. The metaphors are very hard to unpack. And also the poems, because they're written so laboriously, it's so hard to write, are very packed, very small, very dense. That's one of the things that makes it special, and that's one of the things that shows, I think, in the new book, the difference between that difficulty and in the new book, a much more accessible style, which is also urgent and dynamic like the previous book, but simplified.
Kanske tar jag för mig mer än jag kan tugga. Tugga för fan, tugga. Kunde jag tugga kunde jag kalla mig normal. Tänk att inte kunna tugga. Kan inte svälja så jag tuggar. Kan inte ropa, kan ropa. En svulten jämmer bara, men det får duga. Kan inte tugga, inte tugga. Känner inga dofter, känner dofter. Kan inte tugga, kan inte tygla tarmen. Kan tygla blåsan. Kan tygla. Kan inte tugga en sen då. Jag är torr och fin under, alltid, men kan inte tugga. Kan inte gråta. Kan gråta hela kuddar blöta. Men vem bryr sig? Kan gråta hinkvis. Kan inte skratta. Kan skratta. Kan inte sluta. Kan inte förstå varför jag skulle sluta. Kan inte rå för det. Säg någonting sorgligt då. Kan inte tugga.
In Under the Eye of the Clock, Christie is able to take a franker, closer look at his life, and there's also a new irony. In both books he stands slightly apart, observing, calling himself Joseph Meehan and his mother Nora.
Lille Meehan kanske kan överleva. Krampaktigt knutna händer, inga tecken på hörsel. Andas så till sist, hjärtat sviktar. Men så växer livets vätskor som ett lödder i skrikande lille Meehan. Han skulle ingenstans, men livet krävde honom. Motspänstig lyftes han ur sin sköna hängmatta. Kniven bände loss honom. Själv hade han valt döden, men ödet ville annorlunda. Döden har inga hemligheter. Joseph Meehan vet det. Han var där och återvände. Han vilade hos gudarna i 2 bedrägliga timmar, men livet slog sina kopparklor i honom och kallade honom befriad. Vigd åt sitt kors strävade han fram på barndomens väg, men ingen så sargad som han kunde förtjäna att leva. Bäst om han finge dö ändå, sa kärringarna. Bäst om han finge dö, sa historien. Bäst att kavla upp ärmarna, tänkte hon, den starka, när hon hörde hans förtvivlade gråt. Det var hon, hans mor, som behandlade honom som en människa. Hon lärde sig se hans intelligens, lärde sig förstå hans ögons språk. Hon såg att järnekens gröna bär en gång kunde mogna till glödande rött om de fick tid och hem.
Back you come. Come on. Now.
As I saw Christie developing, I noticed he had the very same interest in everything as my daughter Yvonne had. And even though it wasn't a big conscious effort on my part to discover, whether he was intelligent or not, it never crossed my mind but that he was, because every little thing about him was registering as normal. I started to teach him his alphabet, and I wanted to actually help him to physically feel what it was like to make the letter A. So therefore, he actually felt me helping him make the letter A. Then he coloured it in with different coloured chalks. And then he heard my sound, my speaking, the sound for him. So he heard it and saw it from every angle. And from there we built up the alphabet, and then short words, and then longer words. And I never realised then that I was actually helping him to lay the foundation to what he is doing now.
Solen sken över Korplund den dagen för länge sedan. Han befallde henne att se ut genom fönstret. Han stirrade stint på hennes öra och befallde henne att lyssna på fågelsången. Han vred sig i hennes knä och bad henne lyssna efter barnen som lekte borta vid byskolan. Så hånade han sig själv. Han visade henne sina armar, sina ben, sin värdelösa kropp. Han befallde fram sina tårar och skakade på huvudet. Han såg på sin mor och anklagade henne. Han förbannade henne och formade läpparna till sitt grälsjuka. Varför just jag? Oroad av den ungdomliga smärtan i hans insikt försökte hon roa honom. Men han vägrade tjurigt att titta på kalvarna. Han skakade på huvudet och tittade bort. Hans mor försökte igen. Titta på lammen där, sa hon. Och pekade på fåren som tuggade vid sin krubba i hagen. Men han grät så förtvivlat att hon gav upp. Ja, sa hon. Då går vi in och pratar istället. Hon satte honom i hans stol och betraktade sin son, sin guldlockige åklagare. Han grät oavbrutet och intalade sig att han tvingat henne till tystnad. Men genom tårarna såg han henne böja sig ner för att se honom in i ögonen. Hör nu på mig, Joseph. Du kan se, du kan höra, du kan tänka, du kan förstå allt du hör. Du tycker om din mat, du tycker om fina kläder. Pappa och jag älskar dig, vi älskar dig som du är. Hans mor hade sagt sitt, hon återgick till sina sysslor och han återgick till sin gråt. Beslutet som fattades den dagen etsades för alltid in i hans minne. Han var bara 3 år, men han började vårda den enda låga han såg, att han levde och att han var önskad precis som han var.
In spite of the extra physical demands Christie makes, the Nolans are a normal family. His relationship with his sister Yvonne, who's 2 years older, is that of a normal brother and sister, with no sense of inequality. Under the Eye of the Clock celebrates the fun of his childhood.
Yvonne och hennes bror var yra av spänning. Hans syster knuffade till honom för att han skulle se det hon såg, och vred han inte på huvudet fort nog högg hon tag i det och gjorde det åt honom. Joseph fogade sig inte alltid efter henne. Han hade egna ögon och han valde sina egna syner. Och ibland fogade han sig inte därför att en karl måste hålla sin syster stången. Så det var på rent trots han vände sig bort. Han blev rasande när hon körde med honom. Han försökte ju aldrig tvinga på henne sina syner. Så kom de sorgliga grälen. Hans syster anföll med stickande ord, men han höll stånd genom att skrika och kasta mördande blickar på henne.
We're normal brother and sister. We fight a lot of the time, as usual, but mostly they're not serious rows. Usually only half serious when we're fighting. But I think Chris depicts them sometimes purposely because he enjoys it. I used to be very jealous of him when I was younger because when relations came or friends, they were always all over Christy and bringing him things, and maybe they'd forget about me or not give me as much as they gave him. But as you get older, you get used to that, and you know why they do that, because they're trying to make up to him in some way. They feel they have to.
Christie talks about himself as a young foal there, and that is what he used to be like. He was in a way uncontrolled sometimes in his use of language. It was exuberant and splendid and joyful and larking about, but it was uncontrolled. Now he is much better at being objective, at describing people after carefully scrutinizing them, how he watches his teachers at school and listens. He gets other people's voices very exactly, his mother's, and the voices of the children at school, the children who don't realize he's listening and talk so terribly openly about him. And there's a new humor now, too, which comes from the objectivity, that he can distance himself. The humor comes in that scene where the friend brings him a magazine. He promises to bring him a magazine, which he'll really like, and he looks forward to this. And then The boy brings out the magazine, and it's a bodybuilding magazine with these photographs of great male nudes rippling their muscles. And Christie just roars with laughter, and the boy can't understand what he's laughing at. He doesn't see this absurd disparity between the magazine and what he is.
And it turned out the names of the brands too. Like I get, how would you say, a commission. Do you know what, Christy? You know what I wanted to talk to you about? Reading your book. I was just wondering, you know, why do you move move your reader along so quickly? Do you, is there a point in it? Are you up to something? The clock? Yeah. The radio? Yeah. And the calendar? Mm-hmm. And the clock. So they're my three clues. The radio, the calendar, and the clock. And you set out to capture something, and do you feel you did? Musically? No, come on, work harder. Give me a better clue. Dancing. So what? The movement to pop music. The rhythm. Would it be? No. Well, which would be, of those three, which would be the most important as a clue to the rhythm of your book? Would it be music? It would. So pop music would be the clue to the speed that you move your reader at. That's it, is it? Am I sure? Am I right now? Let me see. Yeah, okay. Do you feel that you've achieved that sort of rhythm? No, what is it? Time will tell. When the experts get at it. I know. Yeah.
Christie's speechless communication between family and close friends is remarkably sophisticated. Once the family had realized how disabled he was, they saw that he would need expert help. They moved from their farm in the country to Dublin so that he could go to the Central Remedial Clinic, where he would be assessed, given physiotherapy, and for the first time, go to school.
Say there are on the map. Tracy, 32 counties. So what are our three choices here? Ricardo, will you read them? Question number 4.
Each day at reading, children could read to all the class, but all Joseph could do was listen. Nora helped him at home, taking each word. She explained how to leave out the unimportant letters and get the sound of the word from the remaining letters. Miss Ryan helped enormously by accruing lots more knowledge about the art of recognizing words. What neither Miss Ryan nor Nora knew was Joseph could only see, because of his haphazard experience in reading, many words turned backwards. Every accommodation was allowed, in simple hope that a means of communication might possibly be found for sad, silent Joseph.
They tried strapping a pencil into his hand first and binding it into his hand, but then there was no coordination there. The hand would fly away, pencil and all. And they tried both of his hands. They tried all the ordinary methods of writing, and they all failed. They tried him on an electric typewriter then, and everything ended in failure. So then, as a last resort, they put a band around his head with a peg coming from it, and they called that a unicorn system of typing. And his spasms would just drive the unicorn stick wild. It was at that stage that he was tried on this new drug, a drug called Lyrisil. And the effect it had on him was that it left him relaxed enough. It didn't slow down his thinking process. It just left him relaxed enough, long enough, that when he would want to nod that head, yes, he could nod it.
After 6 years at the Central Remedial Clinic, Christie was now nearly 13 and ready to go to secondary school. But he wanted to go to an ordinary school and mix with his able-bodied contemporaries. After much discussion and many rejections, he was finally admitted to Mount Temple Comprehensive.
Skolkamraterna talade öppet om hans lyten. Osäkra som de var på hans förståndsgåvor skrek och skränade de som om han inte vore där. De undrade om krymplingen hade blöjor och de ville inget hellre än mönstra honom. Sen diskuterade de hans brist på begåvning. De sökte efter prislappar att sätta på honom. De växlade mellan ord som knäppskalle, idiot, krympling, dåre och imbecill. De tyckte inte att han borde gå i en skola för normala barn. De förlöjligade rektorn och lärarna för att de var så blåögda. Medan dagarna gick och han vallades i skolflocken formulerade han tyst de frågor han ville ställa till sina klasskamrater. De frågor som skulle ställa deras skarpsinne på prov. Inser ni att en pojkes blod flyter i mina ådror? Att en pojkes tankar och drömmar bultar i mitt huvud? Att mitt medvetande pulserar lika friskt som
But some did understand, and they've kept in touch after sharing in some of the publicity when Damburst of Dreams was published.
The head, Mr. Medcott, told us about Chris, and he asked us would we be able to take care of him. So we said yes. I had no idea it was going to be spastic. See, I think that Chris is a reminder just how lucky you are.
I didn't really know what he was like when I saw him first. It was only when I started to look after him that I got to know what he was like. And to understand him. And he's just like any other normal person. Apart from the fact that he can't walk or talk. Well, I just chatter away to him, you know. Just natter all, you know. That's all, yeah. In the class. He does make a few noises now and again, but you just get used to him after a while. You don't even really pay any attention to him. Which I suppose he doesn't really want, but...
Meeting after class, his cabbie drivers clubbed together to have rides on his wheelchair. Standing Ben-Hur like, they rested their feet on the low shafts at the rear of the chair, and steering it by the hand grips, they hurtled down the schoolyard hill. Joseph sat strapped in his phaeton, whilst his joyful rider screamed, "Charge!" and "Get down on your haunches, Joseph, we're fighting men." Such was the scene as the headmaster rounded the corner, and such was his telling off that the chair rarely carried more than 3 passengers on the crest runs of the future.
I see. Sorry.
One of the things about Damburst of Dreams, the first book, was how this child who was so disabled was able to see himself in a kind of universal context. He saw himself really as poised between heaven and hell. Yet at the same time you feel, in some of the poems in the first book, almost too easy to believe so implicitly. In this later book, it isn't like that. The faith is much more challenged.
When it was first published, Damburst of Dreams attracted a great deal of publicity. Journalists came from all over the world to see Christie. Some still couldn't believe he had actually written the book. Skeptics suggested it was his mother after all. Indeed, an American magazine said as much, also convinced by what it considered his dog-like yelping noises. The rage and misery he felt at such treatment was immense.
He blamed God. How could great God stand by and watch a dumb cripple being attacked at his very vulnerable voice? Wheels swished on the aisle as Matthew wheeled Joseph up towards the altar. Genuflecting in front of the hidden Christ, his dad got into a seat and knelt down to say a prayer. His son sat idly gazing about. He ignored the tabernacle. Matthew finished his prayer, and looking at Joseph, he whispered, "Are you ready?" Joseph nodded. His dad genuflected again, and turning the wheelchair, he set off down the aisle again. But his son jumped and nodded towards the side chapel. "What?" said Matthew. "Do you want to see the crucifix?" He wheeled him over, and there, hanging on the wall, was a life-size Christ, crucified to a huge black cross. But Joseph was not seeing the sadness of the spectacle that day. His boy's heart was broken, and he knew who to blame. The bright, angry eyes of the rebellious boy looked up at the great crucifix, and swinging his left arm in a grand arc, he made the 2 fingers sign at the dead Christ. Breathing noisily, he looked at his dad, and with a brazen sweep of his head, he ordered him to wheel his chair away. But hell has its own torments. He was only halfway up the avenue on his way home when hell began its loud laughing. Imagine telling God to fuck off. Thus the niggling began. Imagine saying fuck off to the crucified Christ. Imagine having the nerve to be obscene in front of the crucifixion.
After leaving school, Christie was determined to go to university. In October 1983, he went to Trinity College in Dublin. He would take on his literary predecessors.
Wacky nested notions about fledglings needing time to practice their writing skills went straight out the window when Joseph Meehan went to Trinity College. The boy found himself bending his ear to the fashionable greats in literature. Now he was being challenged by Bronte, Dickens, Conrad and Sterne, while dramatists like O'Casey, Beckett and Synge kindled munificent mullings in his ribald mind. Feasibility cased him in silence, but breathing noisily, he brought his total concentration to bear on what the lecturers were saying. He bashfully sat among brilliant, vocal students and marveled at their shyness and their youthful inhibitions.
You have to realise that Christie's mind is absolutely exceptional, and that even should he have hated university, which he didn't, it was only fair and realistic to actually give his mind that chance of stimulation. I think in the beginning it made a difference to his outlook on life, because, as he says in his book, he saw the other people of his own age at Trinity for what they were, and being first years, perhaps a lot of people who were posers or people who were a bit too smart for their own good. And I think it's at this stage that Christie really begins to realise how much different he is from other quite intellectual people of his own age, that he is definitely the outsider looking at all this and seeing it for what it is. When people actually think about Christie, they think, isn't it amazing, he's handicapped and he can write as well. It's not just that he can write bloody well. People don't seem to understand why, already having one volume of autobiography, Christie has gone on and produced another volume. Now, I see this as part of a development in his writing, where this is his final volume of autobiography, well, at least for quite some time. But he will now go on towards fiction. But what needs to be understood is that it's like the writing of a Russian dissident that's now left Russia. It's the writing of liberation, that Christie had to get this out of his way, out of his system. His life story, his genesis. He just had to do that. Now it's like as if this catharsis is complete. He has rid himself of this explaining, this life story, this struggle, and now the way is absolutely clear for more creative, fresher, newer work.